Okay, let's talk about the book of Revelation. It is, without a doubt, one of the most famous and definitely one of the most misunderstood books in history. For the next few minutes, I want you to just try and set aside everything you think you know about it, because we're going to break down what this book is actually about using the clues the author himself gave us. You know, for centuries, people have treated Revelation like it's some kind of secret roadmap to the future, a cosmic crystal ball for figuring out when the world will end. We try to match its weird symbols to stuff we see in the news, but you have to wonder, is that really what it was for? What if it's something else entirely? What if we've been reading someone else's mail and just getting it all wrong? Because the author gives us some pretty clear instructions on how to read his work. What if the book's real point isn't about predicting the future, but about revealing something absolutely profound about the present? So, to really get the message, we first have to understand what we're reading. The author, a guy named John, tells us right up front that he's blended three different kinds of writing together. It's an apocalypse, it's a prophecy, and it's a letter. So let's quickly unpack what each of those things really means. First, he says it's an apocalypse. Now, I know what that word brings to mind, but the original Greek word, apokalypsis, it just means an unveiling or a revelation. It was actually a popular style of Jewish writing that used all these wild symbolic visions to kind of pull back the curtain and show you God's perspective on what was happening on earth. Second, John calls it a prophecy. And again, this isn't mainly about telling the future. See, in the Old Testament, a prophecy was a word from God for the people, right then and there. It was meant to challenge them or comfort them in the middle of their specific crisis. And finally, it's a circular letter. This whole epic vision was written down and sent to 7 real churches in what we now call Turkey. We're talking about real people with real problems. So whatever this book means, it absolutely had to mean something to them first. So here's the bottom line. Revelation is not a secret code about the future. John is using this rich library of symbols, sure, but he fully expects his readers to get them by looking backwards, back to the Old Testament, where almost all of this imagery comes from. Okay, with that in mind, let's jump into the book's opening. John is exiled on the island of Patmos when he gets this incredible vision of the risen Jesus, who then tells him to write 7 short letters, one for each of those churches we just talked about. And man, these churches were under some serious pressure. Some of them had gotten rich and lazy. Others were watering down their beliefs just to fit in with Roman culture. And the ones who were staying faithful, they were facing harassment, even violent persecution. They were literally being told to deny Jesus or face the consequences. Now, in every single letter, Jesus calls on his followers to overcome, or you could say to conquer. And this sets up the central dramatic question for the entire book. How can this tiny, persecuted group possibly conquer the mighty Roman Empire? I mean, what does that even look like? The rest of the book is the answer to that question. Right after the letters, John's vision takes him straight into God's heavenly throne room. And it's here. This is where we get the single most important moment in the whole book. The one symbol that unlocks everything else. He sees God on the throne holding a scroll that's sealed shut. This scroll is basically God's master plan for history, how his kingdom is finally going to come to earth. But there's a huge problem. No one in heaven or on earth is worthy to open it. And John just weeps. He's devastated. But then an angel announces that there is someone worthy. The Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David. Now these are famous titles from the Old Testament for the Messiah, a conquering military king who everyone expected would crush God's enemies with force. So John hears this proclamation of a mighty conquering lion, but when he turns to look, what he sees is the complete opposite. He sees a lamb standing there as though it had been slaughtered. And this is it. This is the mind-bending paradox at the heart of the entire book. For John, Jesus is the conquering Lion King, but his power, his victory, was revealed in his weakness. He conquered evil not by killing his enemies, but by dying for them. His death wasn't a defeat. It was his coronation as king of the world. So now this slain but living lamb is the only one who can open the scroll. And as he opens the seals, he unleashes 3 cycles of 7 judgments: the seals, the trumpets, and the bowls. These visions show us the kind of world that the Lamb's followers have to live in and conquer in. Now, it's really important to see that this is not a linear timeline from past to future. Look how the cycles are nested inside each other. John seems to be retelling the same period of history, from Jesus' life to his return, over and over from 3 different symbolic angles, and each one gets more intense. When the Lamb opens the first 4 seals, out come the famous 4 horsemen, bringing war, conquest, famine, and death. I mean, it sounds like a tragically typical day in human history, right? And then the 5th seal reveals the souls of martyred Christians crying out to God for justice. Right before the final judgment, there's this dramatic pause. An angel comes down to put a protective seal on God's servants, and John hears the number of those who are sealed, 144,000. It sounds like a military census, 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes of Israel. He hears about an army, ready for battle. But just like with the lion and the lamb, what John actually sees is something completely different. He turns and he sees this immense, multi-ethnic crowd from every nation and tribe and language you can imagine, all standing before God's throne. This is the Lamb's army. And how do they conquer? Not with weapons, but by bearing witness to the Lamb who was slain for them. All right, let's jump to the book's midpoint to see how this all lands. After the next cycle, the 7 trumpets, an angel brings that now open scroll to John. At last, its message is revealed, and with it, the mission of the Lamb's army becomes clear. Which brings us right back to our main question. All those divine judgments, they didn't really lead the world to repent, kind of like the plagues in the book of Exodus. So how will God's kingdom come? How is this army of martyrs actually going to conquer? And here it is. Right at the book's center, we find the core message. The scroll reveals that the church conquers when it imitates the sacrificial love of the Lamb. It's their faithful witness, even when it leads to their own death, that will challenge the powers of evil and invite the nations to change their ways. They overcome by loving their enemies. So this radical, totally counterintuitive path of suffering love, that is the mission. But just as this mission is revealed, this monstrous, terrifying beast rises up out of the sea, and it declares war on God's people. So who is this beast? And how does this final conflict play out? Well, that's the story of the second half of Revelation.